Good morning. We're going over chapter 4, section 4, which is factoring with perfect squares. Now, there's two types of factoring perfect squares. You have completing the square, which is what I have in the top. I'll go over how this works when we deal with that problem. Just for now, I wanted to put it up there so you guys know you have completed the square and you have perfect squares. You also have the quadratic equation, which is left, but we'll take it one part at a time. Now, what is a perfect square binomial? A perfect square binomial is this. A squared plus 2ab plus b squared equals a plus b squared. Now, how do you deal with it? If your a, in this case our a is 1, right? In this case our a is 1 and our b squared is 25. If our middle part is 2 times a times b, so if we do 2 times 1, now 25 is b squared, so when we take the square root, that means our b is 5. We're going to get 2 times 5 is 10, times 1 is 1. So this number is 2 times a times b. It's going to factor into a plus b, so it's going to be into, our a is 1, so it's going to be x plus 5 squared. Now, if you by any chance cannot remember these formulas, you can always factor it as we have been doing. So what do I mean by that? We're looking for factors of 25 that add up to 10. We have 1 and 25, 5 and 5. 5 and 5 work because they add up to 10. So you can go ahead and do x on both parentheses. Now, 5 plus 5 gives us 10, and 5 times 5 gives us 25. Notice how these two parentheses are exactly the same. So because they are exactly the same, you can write them as x plus 5 squared, because it's like multiplying itself twice, which gives you the original answer. So if you have a hard time memorizing how to factor perfect squares, you can always factor the same way we have been doing. And then if you notice that you have two of the exact same parentheses, you can put them as 1 and just make sure you square it because you have two of those parentheses. Here we want to start taking out the greatest common factor. The greatest common factor is 4. So we can say, well, it's 4 and then 9x squared plus 3x plus 1. The formula is still a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. Our a is going to be 3 because that's the square root of 9. And our b is the square root of 1, which is just 1. So if we do 2 times a times b, we're going to get 6. So again, it doesn't work out fully. It's not a perfect square. This will be as simplified as you can get it. We have not touched upon imaginary numbers, so you guys are not able to solve for this yet. So for now, this will be your final answer, which is when you take out the greatest common factor. And this is not a perfect square. So before we dealt with perfect squares in the positive sense, now we're going to deal with perfect squares in the negative sense. So the whole difference is the middle sign. So here is negative and here is negative. But everything else in the equation is exactly the same. So let's try to figure out if this is a perfect square binomial. I'm going to start by taking out the greatest common factor. I'm pretty sure it's 2. So this becomes 2 and then 2x squared minus 12x plus 18. I can take out another 2. So the greatest common factor was actually 4. So 2 times 2 is going to be 4. Let me do the steps. So when I take out another 2, I'm going to be left with 2 times 2. So it's going to be x squared minus 6x plus 9. And that is as far as I can go. Now those 2 times 2 in the outside become 4. It's going to be x squared minus 6x plus 9. Now let's figure out if this is a perfect square binomial. So our a is 1 because we don't have anything that we can take the square root of, and our b is going to be 3. Now our b here we have b squared is equal to 9. So when we take the square root, that is how we get that the b is equal to 3. Now let's figure out if we have a perfect square. So we're going to do -2 times 1 times 3. That's going to give me -6. Because those numbers match, we do have a perfect square. So I can go ahead and say, well, I can write this as, I'm going to leave the 4 on the outside, and it's going to be x minus 3 and then a square on the outside. So here we are looking, can we take out any perfect squares or any greatest common factor? We cannot. So let's look for our a. So our a squared is 64. I'm going to take the square root, and we get that our a is 8 and our b is 1. So if we plug it into the formula, because this is a minus, we're going to use the formula a squared minus 2ab plus b squared. That's going to equal the a minus b squared. So we're looking for the minus 2ab. So minus 2 times your a, which is 8, times your b, which is 1. You're going to get -16. It matches the original, which is -16. So we can actually go ahead and write 8x minus 1 squared as your final answer. Now, just so you guys remember, you can factor this normally and you will get this final answer. So, the same answer. If I were to factor this normally, I'm looking for the factors of 64 times 1. So, we're looking for the factors of 64. So, we have 1 and 64. We have 2 and 32. 3 doesn't work. 4 and 16. 5 doesn't work. 6 doesn't work. 7 doesn't work. 8 and 8 works. So we can go ahead and write 64x. And the only ones that add up to -16 are -8 and -8, but they multiply to a positive 64, so we know we have the right answer. Now we gotta simplify these parentheses, so I'm gonna divide by 8 on the first one, and I get 8x minus 1, and I'm gonna divide by 8 on the second, I get 8x minus 1. And the same thing happens as it did before. We have two parentheses that are exactly the same, so you can combine them into 8x minus 1 square for you to give me the final answer. Now we're working backwards. We're working using different types of two squares. So instead of going from the equation to the two numbers, we're going to go from the two numbers into an equation. But again, all of the factors. Now here you have to notice a few things. The first one is our a is square. The second is our b is square. And the third one, we have a negative sign. What does that matter? When you have a negative sign, you're going to separate them into positive and negative. But remember, we do that because when we multiply a positive times a negative, you end up with a negative sign. Same if you do a negative times a positive, you end up with a negative sign. That's why we split them up into a positive parenthesis and into a negative parenthesis. Now, how do we know how to split them up? Well, you're going to take the square root of our a, so it's going to be our a squared is 25. We're going to take the square root, and we get a is equal to 5. And here we have the square root of 49. That's going to be our b squared. And when I take the square root, I get b is equal to 7. Now, because these two are perfect squares, I'm able to write them in as 5x plus 7 and 5x minus 7. And this would be your final answer. Now, the x is important that you keep it. And another important information is to make sure that there is a subtraction between these two. There's no subtraction. As of right now, you cannot do it. You can also check your work. I'm going to write here check by foiling these two parentheses, and you will get the same thing. So, how do I do it? I'm going to start by foiling, so I get 25. So, let me write it down properly. 5x, times 5x. And then minus 7 times 5x plus 7 times 5x minus 7 times 7. When I do this, I will get 25x squared minus 35x plus 35x minus 49. The 35's cancel out, so we end up with 25x squared minus 49. So you can always check your work in order to make sure that you are correct. This is a good thing about factoring. You can always FOIL and work your work backwards. And as long as you get the original equation, which in this case was 25x squared minus 49, if you match the original equation, you know you did a good job factoring, so you can just move on. So we're looking for our a squared and our b squared. This is our a squared. So a squared equals 16. I can take the square root, so we get a is equal to 4. This one is our b squared is equal to 81. We take the root, and we get b is equal to 9. Now, these two are perfect squares. The next thing you want to look at is if we have a minus. We have to have a minus. If you have a positive, you would write no solution. So here we have unless you can take out a greatest common factor, of course. So since we have two roots that are perfect and a minus sign, I can go ahead and write 4x plus 9 and 4x minus 9 as the final answer. This is it for today's notes, guys. Please go ahead and work on the problems that are due tomorrow morning. Remember, there are 3 worksheets. You guys should have been working on them between 2 days ago, today, and yesterday.